Right, welcome everyone. So, the central banks and governments all around the world are right now pushing heavily for a new form of money, which is called central bank digital currencies. And can you hear me? Is that fine? Yeah. So first of all, I want to ask you, who knows what a CBDC is by the show of hands? That's nice. It's quite informed. We can go deep. So, but to start it off, Filip, tell us please, what is a CBDC?
Maybe I will tell what CBDC is not, because everybody knows what CBDC is. So. Yeah, for sure, it's nothing new for us and for you. It will be just the same underlying value that it's not there, and it will be just suited with many different tools to control us. It's literally the same stuff that we are using already right now in the banks, and it will be not changed at all for the first phase. And next phase, they will be taking from us many different things that are normal for us right now. So it's our old, not usable currency with the new set of the rules and tools to just slave us more. Sorry, but this is the truth.
Thank you. Yeah, Matthew.
And then I think just one additional thing, just technically, is that there's, in the banking system, there's what we call basic money. And then there's, which is like outside money, which is outside the banking system. So gold used to be like that. Bitcoin is like that. It's basic money. It's outside the system naturally. Inside money is like your bank deposits, your money market funds, time deposits. CBDC will also be an outside money. It's a basic money, so it means naturally it will be outside the system. So just like physical cash, that's another thing that's basic money. It means that the central bank itself is the one that issues this unit. Of course, everybody knows physical cash. It's literally a liability on the balance sheet of the central bank. That's technically what it is. And so it's the exact same thing. It's just going to be a digital replacement of this. But the key tension that we will find, I think, in the future is that you have this outside money, which Bitcoin is as well, and that's always going to compete with what is inside money or inside the banking system. So it's going to be interesting to see how, of course, I'm with everybody here that CBDC is going to be an Orwellian hellscape, but it is going to, at the end of the day, be a competitor to what we know as bank money or bank deposits.
Thank you. And if I believe, in some countries, the CBDC project is quite well advanced. That's, I believe, China, maybe some other country. Rahim, if you could give us a hint about like how it looks in China, maybe in the combination of the social credit score system.
Yes, I think CBDCs in itself are the most boring thing of a whole umbrella term in public perception. Now, for most people, CBDCs in public perception, I think, are three different things, and they are overlapping. One thing is the boring stuff of the digital central bank money or access to a central bank account. The second one is surveillance, and the third one is the replacement of cash payments. And they are interrelated, and we're seeing that in China. Of course, there's a kind of hypothesis where things go and trends go. I think the most boring one, most evident one is, of course, central banks thinking about digital forms of money, and we see prototypes everywhere. But the Chinese were quite early in approaching the two separate and overlapping fields, and it's the question of surveillance in a society, and the other one is how the user interface improvement of cash and how cash will be replaced in a more digitalized, more pro-technology environment. And that's partly a natural tendency. And so the Chinese build a lot on private corporations providing those user interfaces. And it turned out to be the right way from the perspective of how will payments change. And they just had a lot of different prototypes for different cities, mainly based on the expertise of private companies. In particular, two biggest one, Ant and Tencent. Surveillance, the problem of surveillance really depends on do we trust each other more or less than we trust our government? For the Chinese, which are low trust society, I think the case usually is they trust each other less than they trust their government. So the agreement is quite high. Most Chinese, if you ask them, there's a big majority that are in favor of social credit, of surveillance, and they think it creates a safer, better environment for them. I think it's linked, that the trust in their government is linked on the promise, and that's economic growth and improvement. Once that's gone, I think we'll probably see a flipping there. So it'll be different for our society still. I think that's the danger, and that's the public perception of how digital forms of money would allow this kind of surveillance, linking with other data sets. And that's what central banks in Europe, of course, are seeing, or the European Central Bank or other Western central banks are seeing, is that the population tends to be skeptic. And adoption is not a clear, straightforward way. Due to this perception of it being part of the surveillance program, we've seen in Nigeria, for example, a very low adoption rate. So it would be a disappointment or failure so far. And the European central banks, under the umbrella of the European Central Bank, you still have the European central banks because it's hard to replace or displace government employees. They are hesitant because they see the main challenge is adoption and trust from the population.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the CBDC programs being pursued around the world by the governments and central banks, I recommend Atlantic Council Tracker, the CBDC Tracker by Atlantic Council, and I believe you are working on some tracker as well, Matthew, right?
Yep. So we'll also be making a CBDC tracker this year with the Human Rights Foundation. Myself, Janine from the Bitcoin for This Month in Bitcoin Privacy newsletter, Nick Anthony from the Cato Institute, and there's actually our developer, John Bahari, is here as well. I think he's speaking. So it's going to be pretty good. We're going to actually, literally track every balance sheet of the central bank, all the physical currency supply, all the digital currency supply. But beyond just the numbers, it's actually going to be from a human rights perspective. You can have a tip line if you're a journalist or if you're in one of these countries and you hear things about how draconian this is going to be, you can write to us anonymously, and we will talk about that. So on that point, yeah. And there's only a few that are active right now. I mean, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Nigeria is flailing, as Rahim mentioned. China's still in the pilot mode. But maybe just to pivot one more point as well, one of the things that I keep reminding people, and I keep telling people because it is important to look at the numbers, even though the numbers are boring for a lot of people. I track all these currencies already. I track the top 50 currencies in the world. I do this report every quarter. And everybody talks about CBDC, but nobody talks about CBPC. CBPC is central bank physical currency. It's a 1,000-year-old instrument. It was monopolized by Kublai Khan 800 years ago. It's a very old instrument. We all know it. It's, like I said, outside the banking system. Today, it's monopolized by the central bank, but it's in your wallet. It's in a grocery store. It's in a safe. It's usually outside the banking system. All right. This is a big amount of cash, and it's still growing. All right. There's about $9 trillion worth of cash money in the world still. The U.S. dollar is only about 2 trillion of that. All right. So I'm talking euros, yuan, yen, Swiss franc, Brazilian real, everything. $9 trillion. That grows at 10.5% per year compounded. That's a doubling every 7 years. And that is a rate of growth that is not declining no matter what you hear in the media. Nobody uses cash. Nobody uses cash. It's not true. It's not true. The other point, where's the demand side? Well, the rate of growth of humanity in the last 50 years has grown about 1.5% per year compounded. So that's a doubling every 50 years. We had 4 billion people on the planet 50 years ago. Now we have 8 billion. So we as society grow much slower than they print money, which is why we're into Bitcoin, right? But I am actually very hopeful that even the old legacy technology of cash is going to give a lot more competition to CBDC than people realize. And so I just want to put that out there. I always say that.
Right. Now, in terms of the supposed advantages of CBDCs. Why are the central banks pushing for that? Central banks and the government. Like, what should be the advantage of the CBDC compared to what we have now? Does anybody want to pick that?
So, you know, it's like, it's always about the set of the rule. When they are pushing for something, they literally have the long-term plan because, like you mentioned, it's like long-term plan for everybody. For us, like according to the Bitcoin, according to the adoption, it's also a long-term plan because we need to work, and the system of the banking right now have much of the everything that the normal person will need. They just don't understand the difference between the underlying value and the assets. And I think with the CBDC, we will be able to see how the people who don't know about the Bitcoin and about the possibility will see the difference in some way. Of course, it will be the very long-term plan, and with the physical money, it will be much more hassle for them to go out. We see what is happening right now with the application. People are using it, but in many different countries on the outside of the Europe and also in the free port, they are still using the paper route, and they will do that. So this is the most hassle, and they putting all that sets to make the easy work. But for us, they're working also for us to showing all the things that not should to be used in CBDC and in that kind of projects, because they are already here, they are working. We see what's happening, and you mentioned China. So we see it's not proper. People also need to see that and understand that this is too much, but it will also need the time for it.
What is the likelihood of CBDCs being imposed, let's say, in Europe, by let's say in the Eurozone, by the ECB? Rahim?
The likelihood is very high, but the question is how relevant it'll be. So almost 100% likelihood that some form of CBDC will appear, because as you both said, it's not that different from what we have today. I'd be skeptical about how that is be this old dominating form of money. I don't see that, because first there's competition to the banking sector, which is still, I think, quite important also as an interest group and as a lobby. And the second thing is, it may seem the advantage is it's digital, but the main thing about cash is not that it's not digital, it's that it's a bearer instrument. And a bearer instrument means we can use it peer-to-peer without permission, and it can be used internationally. And that's, of course, one of the main reasons for the still increasing demand for cash, in particular in developing countries. That's why in Nigeria, the e-Naira competed against dollar and euro cash, physical cash, because a bearer instrument, you don't need any permission, and that's used for real estate transaction. Basically, every larger transaction in developing countries is using cash. So I think this cash usage would rather be replaced by Bitcoin. So there's no way that CBDC competes with Bitcoin. It increases actually the likelihood of, or the need for Bitcoin, and it will push Bitcoin adoption, the bigger the CBDC part gets. But I'd be very skeptical, because the central banks, they are realizing that they have trust issues. So if it appears, it will not be called a CBDC. I think it'll be a kind of wallet where you get a government handout, some kind of climate bonus or something, where everyone to get his 500,000 euro would install an app, but it's a small proportion of the money supply, and they'll just test maybe for 5 years. And they know that's, of course, they are quite vulnerable there as well, because if it fails, it's a trust failure, and it decreases trust and already big trust issues that Western governments face nowadays. It can be hacked, it can fail. And we've seen with a lot of government digital projects, they just go nowhere, because government, even with all the money that they are able to produce or get by monetizing their credit, they are not really able to contract the most competence that's needed, because for almost every decision they take, they need lots of consultants, consultancy firms, which makes it all very expensive, never finishing on time, and then when it finishes, it's failing, or it's redundant or irrelevant.
Yeah, I agree with all that. But just two more points about like the adoption in Europe. There's, again, a couple headways that CBDCs are going to face, again, from the banking system, that inside money. So, as Rahim said, $9 trillion, that's a big amount of cash money in the world. I mean, Apple's like a $2.8 trillion company, something like that. So it's still a lot of money in physical cash around the world. But that's nothing compared to what banks operate with. I mean, we're talking $100 trillion maybe in broad money. That's bank money around the world. So how do you think banks are going to feel when they're going to have to deal with the central bank taking away their market share or their loanable funds, which is what a bank deposit is? They're not going to like it. All right? And this is not a secret. It's in like 1 million papers. Everybody knows it. So I always try to say, again, the competition is going to be from the CBPC itself, the physical currency. That's a real thing. It's not fake. And the CBDC is going to be another thing on the balance sheet of the central bank that's going to have to compete with that. It's a market share thing. And then on top of that, you have the banking system that's not going to like it. So that's why they say all these things about, oh, well, we'll do it, but maybe 500 euro limit, something like that. Now, the third thing I want to say is the concern I have with Europe is 2 countries, Norway and Sweden. They are the 2 countries that have been vocal about anti-cash for like 15 years. Not even talking about CBDC, just using credit cards, green economy, we're so green and all this stuff. So Norway and Sweden you look at their physical money supplies, they're the only ones in the world that don't match the trend that I mentioned earlier. They're the only ones that are kind of going like this. Now, the last couple of years, they go back up a little bit. They just can't stop printing. But they've tried, and they're rich, and they're kind of socialist. So I do see Norway and Sweden as actually being the 2 places that are like really going to be like, whatever it might be, poor people, refugees, anybody who might need an account that they can't get at a bank, even though I think banks have to open accounts for everybody in Norway and Sweden by law. Maybe they'll try to push this thing through, I think, maybe faster than Europe. But they're small markets anyway, relative to their currency, so that's my thoughts there.
And in terms of impact on Bitcoin, if, let's say, the ECB goes through with their digital euro plans, do you think they will attempt to ban Bitcoin in some way? Will they try to shut off the exits? Because Bitcoin then is the most obvious competitor to the digital euro.
Yes, in the form of capital controls. Usually it's when it appears, and then when it will be more visible that Bitcoin is a good replacement for cash, I think that's where the pressure will come from. And generally, I'd say there's a tendency towards more capital controls, but that also, of course, increases the need for Bitcoin at the same time. So it'll be like an effort to regulate it, but making the case ever stronger for Bitcoin. And we've seen that in other countries, like Turkey, for example, trying to control, of course, capital flows, but failing to a certain extent. And there we see quite high Bitcoin adoption. And I'll expect the same in Europe.
Right. I believe the CBDC probably would be not interchangeable with Bitcoin. I feel like that's the most obvious thing. If the CBDC is programmable and you can control what you can do with it, where you can send it, then obviously you wouldn't be able to deposit it to an exchange and to change it to Bitcoin. So that would push us more towards the true peer-to-peer Bitcoin interactions.
Yes, but also circumventing that kind of control will increase peer-to-peer cooperation. We've seen it in India in the drive for digital currency. It's how you deal with it is you find people and trusted networks, and everyone uses his account, and you trade space on your account, more or less. And we've seen that emerge, and I'd be pretty confident they'll increase the use case for peer-to-peer solutions, definitely. And it won't be easy to control.
Yeah, I think it's all about adoption and about current state of progress according to the regulation and approach to the Bitcoin in general. Because, for example, in Poland, we are the blank spot on the map right now according to the CBDC, because our government tells us officially that they are not even interested in it right now. So, we have totally different approach for example, in Nordics. I think with the proper time, it's pros and cons, because pros for us, like a association, like a people who are working with Bitcoin, 10 years plus, it's opportunity to get back them on the board in the proper time, because they are still don't working and they still don't know how to prepare, because we have our own Polish zloty, so it's a little bit different approach like with the Czech koruna. So we don't have a strict pipeline to get the euro, so they are not working on the CBDC also. So it's all about the timing, and we are right now hoping that with the next couple of years, when the MiCA will be approaching, we will get that opportunity to bring the proper value and proper understanding of the Bitcoin and opportunities to use it maybe official currency.
And in terms of what should Bitcoiners do about it? Like, if we consider CBDC a threat, how should we inform the public? What should we do? For example, there's a Twitter account called Resist CBDC, and it's all focused on informing people about that. Yeah, what's your take on that?
Just for us, I would say again, education. Check out our CBDC tracker. Please drop us a tip line if you hear something, if you know someone in government and you hear maybe they're trying to weasel in some weird legislation or something like that. We will try to do our part as well, especially from a human rights perspective in the developing world with CBDC tracker.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a good thing that CBDC is like this kind of umbrella term in the perception, and there are some really bad things linked to it. So I think the thing you can do is use that for trolling. I think it's a meme war that will happen around CBDCs. And of course, they'll all be treated very unjustly, the central banks, and they don't understand where comes all this surveillance idea from. But of course, they have all the incentives to do so. They'll all claim that they'll protect our privacy even better than the corporations. But I think it's good that they have a really uphill battle to fight in the meme space, and I think they'll be losing. And I think it's a good thing that central bankers are losing trust, and that's, I think, where we can help a bit. So it's a different kind of education, maybe.
Yeah, it's all about education. I remember I was like 7 years ago, also in the Prague on one of the conference, and I was talking about the need of the education in general. So right now we have the same. We just need to show the difference on the real experience that we had from last years, because showing the people the experience according to what they were able to achieve, it's the best option for education always. So proper example and show the difference, because here we have much of a difference according to the value and of course the trust, because the trust is something that we all need to maintain. And Bitcoin, according to the other system that we know, it's right now one of the perfect system and the perfect option that we can choose.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes left, so if there is a question from the audience, please raise your hand and we can give you a mic. So if you want to ask anything about the CBDCs, yeah, there's a question right over there.
So you said the CBDCs, the central banks will try and tell us as a population that they will do something about the privacy. In which ways do you see will they try and, well, do that, and what can we counter to that? That it's, you know, will they put some kind of backdoor in it?
Yes, I would say something like cash would not be allowed to emerge nowadays. So it's just a relic, so of course it won't be as good as cash. But the main danger comes from the complacency of the population. It's just that unfortunately privacy is not something that people care about a lot. They only start caring about it once they really distrust the government more than they trust themselves. I think we're going in the right direction, but it'll be convenience versus privacy, and usually convenience wins out. So I think the best ground for optimism is that we've seen a lot of improvement in convenience and Bitcoin payments and layer 2 Lightning payments and so on, and all the things emerging in the peer-to-peer economy and ecosystem. And that gives me hope that you have privacy just built in as a default thing, and that's the way to hope for.
Hello, I would like to ask how efficient they are in cooperation on a global scale, because it's not effort of some separate entity. It must be like cooperated through all the world. So are there some obstacles for them?
You are asking about the cooperation between the CBDC issuers, so the central banks
exactly.
in that matter. You know, it's all about the currency. So if you want to use the dollars, we really need to work with Fed about the CBDC they will issue. So of course, like right now you have a SWIFT and other different transfer options, and banks need to cooperate with each other. It will be the same stuff. So of course, they will need to cooperate. If they are right now cooperating for EBC, for example, for Euro, they are a couple central banks cooperating, but because they are working on the same currency, so Euro.
So far, I'd say they are not at all successful because there's two things to cooperation. The one thing is you want to have one solution. The one size fits all doesn't work because they're uncertain. They don't know what's working. You can look at a CBDC tracker site and you see it's all very different prototypes using different technologies. They are unsure. So why even the Chinese, a quite totalitarian state, is using the bottom-up approach in testing different implementations. And the second thing is, of course, a geopolitical thing. The biggest thing would be the digital renminbi as a kind of BRICS payment layer. But they are very far from that because even within the BRICS, the non-Western aligned countries, there's too little trust to really have a digital renminbi as a kind of payment layer. And I don't see them getting there. And that's the kind of cooperation we should be afraid about. And that's a good thing that we are going into a multipolar order where the trust between the big geopolitical powers is going down. So that makes it even more difficult to cooperate there.
Yeah, and I've said for like 5 years, I mean, in the US as well, like when they were rolling out, Obamacare, for example. I mean, it was a big centralized system in the United States, different than a CBDC, but still, I mean, that website was just breaking. Like the government typically doesn't make stuff that works. The only thing they can do really is print out cash, and then they have third-party companies to make sure their little logos and threads and details that it's not counterfeit, because that's the worst thing they could do is counterfeit money. Then you find a spot in jail for yourself. So. Yeah, I think I completely agree with all those points, but I do think that the technological prowess of the government is usually an overblown thing, but definitely not something to take lightly. Yeah. Have to be eyes wide open about this, and as always, Bitcoin's going to be the solution there.
Yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah.
My question is, I buy Bitcoin all the time with cash, with euros, with dinars or something. What if they, when they create these CBDCs, what if they make it illegal to buy Bitcoin with CBDC? How will I buy it then?
You find people with CBDC that want to exchange it for cash or whatever you offer them. And that's how it worked out in India, as I mentioned. It's a way around, and maybe there'll be services to find a way around. There'll still be a way.
But that will probably be illegal to do,
Yeah, lots of things are illegal.
Thank
Question of
you.
execution.
Yeah, but in general, in that way, the peer-to-peer exchange will be working just like now. So for all of you, you just need to be aware that CBDC are here, but they are not very scary right now. And you just need to be aware and start, if you are not already, just to build your world in the internet of money and in the digital economy using Bitcoin. So if you're doing that, you will be ready definitely much more than anybody else when the CBD will hit us hard.
It's a real risk, though. It is. And I think that, again, I would just say, don't forget that cash is a real thing, and it's growing. Don't forget that it's actually growing. They can't stop printing it, so use that, and of course, buy Bitcoin with it as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Please, round of applause.